Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today is podcast number 1711, so 1711, 1711. The topic is Q&A, and the title is SARMs, Selective Androgen Receptor Modulators. What in the world is that? This was requested by a listener. SARMs are essentially, they're advertised as legal steroids. That would be, they're not, the companies aren't going to say that, but that's essentially what they are. Is they're advertised as, well, if you want to take steroids, but you don't want to do it illegally, you can take these instead. So, selective androgen receptor modulators. What in the world is that? Essentially, they're compounds that bind to androgen receptors in the body, and they're designed to selectively choose the androgen receptors in muscle and bone tissue, minimizing side effects on other organs. The idea, they were kind of initially developed for medical purposes, as were basic steroids, such as treating muscle wasting conditions, osteoporosis, hormone disorders, things like that. But then they get taken by people who don't have those problems to try to increase muscle tissue, try to basically, take steroids as we would think of steroids when you think of bodybuilding. In the world of bodybuilding, they want to have bigger muscles, so they would take steroids. So if somebody essentially is wanting the benefit of steroids, but they don't want to be trying to find them illegally, get in trouble for having them illegally and all that stuff, they would aim to take SARMs. Some of the best-selling SARMs, they usually have some kind of steroidal derivative type name, but there's a couple different ones, I know Ostarine, Testolone, Cardarine. I don't even know how to say some of these things, but there's a lot of ones that are kind of popular, but there's pros and cons. So the pros that the SARMs companies will tell you, and with the concept of what SARMs were for medical purposes, is to increase muscle mass and strength. So SARMs can help kind of stimulate protein synthesis, and it helps with muscle fiber development. So that would be one kind of benefit of them. It can help enhance athletic performance. It helps overall with just endurance, stamina, overall performance. A person will feel better. Now, some of that's going to be the placebo effect, where they're taking a SARM, therefore they feel like they should feel better, so they perform better. And then, since it does help with protein synthesis, and they say they help reduce inflammation, it can help speed up recovery, so you can recover faster between your workouts. And they're supposedly helpful for maintaining or improving bone mineral density, which would be helpful for osteopenia or osteoporosis. I'm not a big fan of SARMs, not really. Just because there's a lot of negative effects, and typically the negative effects seem to be stronger than the positive effects. A lot of men will develop gynecomastia, which is the formation or the growth, basically, not formation, but growth of breast tissue in men. And they then have to have surgery for it if they can afford that, or they'll have puffy nipples, and there's actually breast tissue underneath that. In professional bodybuilders who abuse steroids, you'll sometimes see that until they get enough money to get the surgery to get it taken out. But gyno is very strong reaction to SARMs. SARMs will jack up your testosterone. Your body responds by increasing estrogen. Then the estrogen levels get too high, and that stimulates breast tissue growth. You also have liver toxicity. So taking any kind of oral is very hard on the liver and kidneys. So you're going to run into some liver issues if you take SARMs. There's cardiovascular risk for sure, and then also just the long-term suppression of natural testosterone. You might be able to get a bump in testosterone when you're taking the SARMs, but essentially that's like an artificial bump. And then as you would take away the SARMs, your body's own ability to produce testosterone will have decreased because some of that workload would have been taken care of through the SARM in the way it works, and there's a lot of like sciencey stuff to it. But if your body's saying, I'm working X units of hardness, it's hard for me to produce testosterone, and I'm working X units per day. Well, if you take the SARMs, and the SARMs could take away 20% of that workload for the body will just reduce itself down 20%. It'll work less. And then all of a sudden when you take the SARMs away, now you're at only 80% capacity. So it has potential to, especially if you cycle them inappropriately, it has potential to reduce long-term natural testosterone production. So there's also, since SARMs are not FDA regulated, you don't actually know what the hell is in the bottle. Supplement companies can put in whatever the hell they want. If they want to stay in business for long term, it's probably in their best benefit to put in something that produces really good results. But at the same time, there's no regulation to it. The FDA doesn't look into it until it starts killing people. I remember back in the day there was something called mast tabs, which was, in a sense, a type of SARM. And people would take these mast tabs, and they were reporting huge gains from these things. So then everybody started taking them. The price went sky high. The company sold a ton of them. People got gynecomastia, and then all of a sudden, everybody said it stopped working. Nothing was working. Then the business went out of business. So likely they spiked it with something to get word of mouth to grow. Then they stopped spiking it with stuff because that was probably expensive. And then they sold a bajillion of them, made a shit ton of money, and then just went out of business and took their money and ran. So it's not safe in the sense that if you're looking at certain supplements, since they're not FDA regulated, there's going to be more likelihood of certain supplements being abused in regards to being not as high dosed as they label themselves to be, or to be spiked initially to grow word of mouth and then pull back. SARMs are going to be one of the categories of drugs that would be most likely to be abused in that way. So I'm not a big fan of them because, like I said, although the plus side sounds nice, I've only ever seen in friends and or clients, I've only ever seen the negative effects being far greater than the positive effects. So what we can look at is, what can we do instead? If I don't want to take SARMs, I don't want to take this supplement that sounds like it's going to have a lot of negative effect for me, but I do want to maximize my strength and muscle tissue. There are some things we can take that they're not going to give you the same effect as, taking exogenous testosterone. So if you go out and you get, there's a bunch of different types of like esters to testosterone, but you might have heard like test prop. There's a bunch of other ones, but you can get testosterone. There's other drugs as well. Tren, you probably have likely heard of Tren on the internet, and there's other drugs, but you're not going to get an effect as strong as those would give you by taking stuff that's legal and quote-unquote over-the-counter non-prescription. You're just not. But we can get a good effect. So if you're looking for stuff that's non-prescription, that is legal, what can we do? There's a couple things. So I'll list them out, and then you can kind of pick and choose however you want. The first one is use caffeine. I know this is dorky. I'm going to get to good ones here in a second. But time your caffeine well. I buy caffeine pills, like tablets, and I'll take them usually 10, 15 minutes before the workout, or at the start of the workout if I'm like, oh shit, I better get my workout in. I'll take the caffeine pill, and then it kicks in kind of like as I'm getting into the workout and getting warmed up and whatnot. But the reason why caffeine is so good is it can produce a better training stimulus. If you get a bunch of energy, you're a little jarry, like a little jumpy, you got some nerves bouncing around, and you're like, oh man, I'm feeling really good today, da-da-da-da-da. All of a sudden, you're more aggressive and you're more focused. You're just going to get a better training session, which produces a better training stimulus, which can get you better results. Creatine, we've all heard of that one. Creatine monohydrate's a cheap one, but it's actually the best one. There's other forms of creatine that companies will try to sell you that's way more expensive. But creatine is one of the most studied and absolutely most effective supplements for increasing strength. And then as that increases strength, you can then use that in training to create more muscle tissue damage, which then can eventually lead to greater muscle tissue. So creatine helps basically maximize ATP storage, which is adenosine triphosphate. And that's basically the energy that we use for explosive strength-based contractions. You want to make sure your ATP stores are full so you have the most kind of explosivity to your muscular contractions, and there's nuances to that, but essentially creatine is a really good one to take and it's super cheap. Beta-alanine is actually really good as well. It's an amino acid, and it helps where carnosine levels basically in the muscles. If you have really high levels or full levels of carnosine, it can help reduce muscle fatigue, and that actually helps kind of improve high intensity exercise. So again, you can produce a better training stimulus. Now, most pre-workouts supplements are going to have beta-alanine in it. However, if it doesn't, it might be a good one to add to it. You can also do basic, branched chain amino acids, BCAs. BCAs are leucine, isoleucine, and valine, and they are very important in protein synthesis to make sure that your body can maximize that process of turning over protein to muscle tissue. So that's really good to make sure that you have a full and complete amount of BCAs. Now, if you're eating the proper amount of protein, quite a variety of sources, you're probably going to be totally fine in BCAs, but wouldn't be bad to add to them if you want to, if you're looking for that extra edge. Omega-3 fatty acids are actually really good for reducing basically like inflammation. It's anti-inflammatory. So it can reduce inflammation, which helps improve muscle recovery, and that allows you to just feel better in your training, and you can train more often, maybe get a little more volume. So omega-3s are actually really helpful. And then Tribulus is a pill, like a compound that clients have taken in the past that they'll say helps with aggression and feeling stronger in workouts. And it improves sex drive, which is why other people might have heard of Tribulus. You get basically just helps that whole process. Now, one of the downsides of Tribulus is you can have really high blood pressure from it. So you have to be careful in the dosage and or just kind of test it and see how it feels for you. But those are supplements that we can take that will help maximize the training stimulus, which then if we have proper nutrition, proper sleep, proper stress management, is going to help us kind of get the most in regards to adaptation. So I'm not a big fan of SARMs. I have only ever seen negative things. If whatever little boost they got, it was far outweighed by the negative eventually. So I'm not a big fan of them. I do not recommend them, and I've never recommended them to any of my clients. However, you can use, caffeine, creatine, beta-alanine, BCAs, omega-3s, and Tribulus, kind of blend all that up, and that will give you a lot of positive effects. So if you're looking for a legal boost for strength and muscle mass, that list would be a pretty good one to make sure that you're maximizing. Okay? Short and sweet, but hopefully it was good. If you have any questions, reach out. Our email is brutalirongym@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, please consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website at www.brutalirongym.com. If you like the information we share on our podcast, so you find more from us on our social media channels, you can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.